The Mount of Olives is a really important place. It's just east of Jerusalem. This hill means a lot to both Jewish people and Christians. The Bible talks about the Mount of Olives many times. It's a place where prophets shared messages from God. It's a place where important things happened in Jesus' life. The Mount of Olives is important in history and for people. Prophets walked there. Jesus taught his followers there. People still visit the Mount of Olives today. They come to connect with its history. The Mount of Olives is more than just a hill. It's a symbol of God being with us. It reminds us of God's plan for everyone. The things that happened on the Mount of Olives changed history. They still change the lives of believers today. The Mount of Olives is a peaceful place. It's a place to think and pray. It's a place to connect with God. We're going to explore what makes the Mount of Olives so important. We'll look at its role in the Bible and what it means for Christians. The Mount of Olives is mentioned a lot in the Old Testament. It's a place of prophecy and sadness. It's connected to important people like King David and the prophet Ezekiel. The Mount of Olives hints at things that will happen in the New Testament. King David ran away across the Mount of Olives. This happened when his son Absalom rebelled against him. David cried as he climbed the mount. He was running away from his own son. This shows us that the Mount of Olives is a place of sadness. The prophet Ezekiel had a vision. He saw God's glory. It was on a mountain east of Jerusalem. People believe this was the Mount of Olives. This vision shows us that the mountain is connected to God's presence. The prophet Zechariah also talks about the Mount of Olives. He tells us about a battle in the future. In this battle, the Lord will stand on the Mount of Olives. The mountain will split in two. This prophecy connects the Mount of Olives to the end of time. The Old Testament shows us the Mount of Olives is an important place. It's a place of safety where God speaks to people and where God will judge. These stories prepare us for how important the mountain is in the New Testament. They show us how important it is in God's plan. The Mount of Olives is super important in the New Testament. It's connected to Jesus' work. Jesus spent time teaching and praying on the Mount of Olives. Some of the most important things in his life happened there. Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey. He came down the Mount of Olives. Crowds cheered for him and called him the Messiah. This happened just like Zechariah said it would. It's the start of the last week of Jesus' life before he died on the cross. Jesus often went to the Garden of Gethsemane. This garden is on the side of the Mount of Olives. He went there to pray. Jesus was betrayed in Gethsemane. This shows us the heavy emotions connected to the Mount of Olives. Jesus gave a big speech on the Mount of Olives. He sat on the Mount of Olives. He talked to his disciples about the future. He said the temple would be destroyed. He talked about coming back again. This speech connects Jesus' work to the prophecies in the Old Testament. The Mount of Olives is really important to the last days of Jesus' life. It's a place of victory and sadness. It's where Jesus got ready for his death and resurrection. These events make the Mount of Olives a holy place for Christians. Right in the middle of Jerusalem, the Mount of Olives is like a reminder of some of the most important moments in Christian history. Jesus often came here to pray and find peace. The Mount of Olives is connected to the things that happened right before Jesus died on the cross, making it a very special and spiritual place. Today, people from all over the world come to the Mount of Olives. They come to think, to find peace, and to connect with the history and spiritual meaning of this holy place. It's a place where the past and present meet, and it's a special place for prayer and reverence.